My dad used to use the expression 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And of course, what he was trying to do was instill in me this idea that success doesn't automatically follow from just having a good idea. Actually, it always takes a lot of hard work as well. Now, we've talked a bit before on the podcast about digital identity and some of the potential benefits that it might bring. And most people, I think, can see that it's got potential and it's a really good idea. But what is the hard work that's needed to make it a real success? What are some of the challenges and how might they be overcome? Let's find out on this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends, and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Navigating Digital Payments podcast. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by two great guests to talk about this subject of digital identity and how it can be implemented. So first up, we have Marie Austenaa, who is the Head of Digital Identity in Europe for Visa. Marie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, David. Very nice to be here.
It's really great to have you with us, Marie. And we also have joining us Colombe Herault, who is an R&D manager at Worldline. Colombe, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Nice to be with you today.
Great to have you both on the podcast. And later, as I said in the introduction, I'm really interested to hear your views on some of the challenges around digital identity and how they can be overcome to make it a success. But first, I thought actually it would be really interesting to get your views on what's happening now. So, Marie, maybe I can start with you and you can just share a little bit. What are the main developments that we're seeing around digital identity at the moment?
Yeah, of course. And I liked your example to start off with 1% ideas or inspiration and 99% perspiration. I think that's where we are now. With the inspiration came to the European Commission a few years ago, and now they've probably done about 5% of the work required. At the end of February, 29th of February, that's when a leap year comes in handy, I think. The European Parliament voted to introduce a new regulation on digital identity for every EU and EEA citizen, within the next few years. And I think that's probably the most important event that's happening in the market now in the last, and that's only a few weeks ago, but recently. Of course, we do see a lot of activities by governments as well, setting up new identity schemes, even getting adoption and traction as well. So I can talk more about that if that's necessary. But this is probably the biggest event recently.
And practically, what is that going to mean? The new regulation coming from the European Commission?
Practically, what this is going to mean is that each government, member state, must issue their citizen that want. It's voluntary for the citizens, but each citizen will have the opportunity to get a digital identity. So today you have your passport or your identity card. Some places, if you wish, other places compulsory, but you are given that by the government. The challenge is that doesn't fit into your laptop or your mobile phone as a way of proving who you are digitally. With a digital identity certificate, that will change it. So that's one thing the governments must do. The other thing they must do is to make sure that there is a safe place, a wallet, that you can keep it in so that you can share it with consent, and you as a citizen is in charge of sharing that data. And of course, this wallet can hold many other pieces of trusted information as well.
So if I understand well, once this is implemented, every EU citizen would have to have the option to access a digital wallet that can hold digital identity, and that digital identity will work anywhere inside the EU. So like a passport works everywhere, this digital identity would work everywhere. Is that right, Marie?
Yes, exactly. Digital service providers, so any company above a certain age, must give the consumers, the citizens, the choice of using this to confirm who they are, or even to remain anonymous, or at least to confirm that, yes, I'm the same person as, came last time. So it'll make it easier and more trusted to interact with any digital service. But I also think it's important to emphasize that this wallet will protect the information and protect the privacy of the consumers. by regulation, you're not allowed to be tracked. And it's up to you to give explicit consent for what kind of information that should be shared about you. And you can withdraw that consent as well. So I'm looking at this as a great leap for protecting the privacy, because it's much more conscious about what any service provider, any digital service will know about you, and what they should not know about you. You can withdraw it. Now there's so much information that is known about you, but you have no power over it. So I think this is a huge benefit that we shouldn't underestimate, really. This is about protecting the privacy of consumers, of citizens.
And as you say, Marie, in the EU, this is clearly kind of a major milestone just reached in February, and a really important initiative that's going to have quite far-reaching consequences. Colombe, maybe I can bring you in there and ask you, what do you think some of the benefits might be for this? Maybe starting by looking from the consumer side, so for citizens.
Yeah, so for consumers, the first one could be being able to have those very seamless customer journeys when willing to share their personal identity. When they are willing to authenticate or maybe share information about where they live or their age, for example. So we can imagine those use cases where you want to share your information with a trusted company, and then you will use a mobile phone to read a QR code, get the list of credentials that the company is claiming for, and then share it like in a trusted environment in a few clicks. That's really the first idea. And as Marie said, the second one is trust and security. We are speaking of information which are stored on the mobile phone in a secure environment. Everything is signed on both sides, meaning that the user is willing to share this information. He's authenticated through biometrics, and the company which is claiming for this information is also providing the information that makes it a trusted environment for this data exchange. So those are the two main things that the consumer can benefit from.
So I guess, like you say, it's firstly convenience, meaning if I need to prove my address, I don't need to go and find a utility bill or a driving license, or if I need to prove my age, I don't have to have something with me apart from my digital wallet, if that's how I choose to prove it. But the other side, which also I think, Marie, you touched on from the regulatory point of view, is that it is being designed to protect the privacy of the consumer and means make sure that you're only sharing things that you want to share in a very trusted way. Marie, maybe looking at it from the other side, from the merchant point of view, what do you think some of the benefits could be for merchants of having this available?
I think for merchants, the impact can be really transformational. Now, as a merchant with a digital presence, beyond the shop on the street, they must have a way of securely interacting digitally with everybody walking into their shop or entering into their shop digitally. Imagine if that person, if you didn't have to worry about, is it a person or a bot? Can I make sure that they are satisfying regulatory requirements like age, for instance, or even maybe, domicile or country or something? Can I get assurances really that I can trust that this is the same person that came back last time, or in fact their name and their address in a way that is compliant with the regulations that's imposed upon me? So getting that really convenient. Colombe had a great example where the consumer is walking up, scanning a QR code, nice and easy, convenient for the consumers. And me as a merchant getting that information and that interaction trusted, less fraudulent, regulatory compliant, and really convenient for the consumer. So I believe it will have a really transformational impact. And it allows me as a consumer to maybe combine different services and optimize and create new services as well.
I guess one thing I'm also intrigued about is I think often when we think about digital identity, we think of digital identity for a person. And I guess that's just because we're used to the idea of identity cards or driving license or passports that are for people. But can digital identity also be used for other entities, like an organization or a business or even an object? Colombe, what's your view there?
So by essence, the regulation provides identity also for companies, as you said. And the idea behind is that those companies will be able to authenticate with the same kind of mechanisms. They will be also able to sign for contracts and also to register for services. So those are use cases that we can see value for companies. It will make them easier with this regulation. Also, maybe something that we are all interested in this place, the fact that they could sign for transactions. So it will be an enabler for B2B relationship. So this part is more for the companies, and I think that people could act on behalf of their company. So it means that in your wallet, you'll be able to have credentials, meaning that you're working for a company, you have specific rights to act on behalf of your company, and then you can do whatever we were speaking of earlier. If we think of objects, maybe it's a little bit more futuristic. We will have the European Digital Product Passport coming also at the same time. This regulation is giving identification for objects. At the moment, we are focusing on like car batteries, for example, which have a long life, and we are willing to make sure that the traceability is right. We know where this battery is coming from, how it has been used, and so on. And I think we can, in the future, make a link between those two, because we will be willing to have those use cases that we were speaking of earlier, like rental car, for example. You need to have someone being identified. You need to have their driving license and sign a contract, and then after, we can imagine that this car that this person is willing to rent is associated to his or her identity for a certain period of time. So this is really something that we can think of making our business easier in the future.
And it's interesting, when I listen to both your answers, it reminds me that we have the idea of authentication, and say that you create an account on a website and you have a username and a password, and maybe you have some, a second factor like a phone. But all that's doing is when you log in a second time, it's trying to prove that it's the same person who created the account the first time. But digital identity, from what you're saying, is actually about knowing that it's not that it's a David Daly, but that it's this specific David Daly. And as you say, that if I then come back again, it's the same David Daly returning. And it also means you can assure it's the same person across different services provided by different companies.
Really, the idea is to provide the customers or the citizens with a tool that enables them to decide whether they would like to be recognized as the same person, or if they want to interact with the company without having to share this information. For example, you need to verify the age of the person. You do not need to know if it's David Daly. You only need to know if he's an adult. Then this person can decide that she or he doesn't want to share more than just this information about the age. The technical tools are made and specified, and the law is very clear that if this person is not willing to be recognized in the different services that they would like to use, the tool should allow that. So it's more like you have this option to be recognized very easily, but if you are not willing to do that and only share some of the credentials that you have, your age, I don't know, if you are French and you are willing to access to a certain type of service that is only, I think of gambling, for example. If you are willing to play online, this company has to check whether you are living in France or not, then you can share this information. But not share all the credentials, your address, and so on and so on.
That's a really interesting point. So what you're saying is that it's possible to prove something about yourself, i.e. that you live in France or that you're over 18, without revealing the information behind that. So your full address or your date of birth in those cases. And we had Michael Salmony on the podcast before, and he raised this exact point. He used the example of going to a nightclub, but that at the moment, if you want to prove you're over 18, you have to present, a passport or a driving license. And that shares a lot more information about yourself than the nightclub actually needs to verify that you're over 18. So that's, I think, interesting, because it means that digital identity actually has the potential to offer more privacy and give you more control over what data you're sharing than physical identity could, where it would be very difficult to have 1,000 different documents all for proving just one different attribute about yourself, but obviously with digital identity that becomes possible. So in a moment, I want to come on to this topic with both of you of what some of the challenges are going to be around actually implementing this, and also maybe get your predictions for what some of the more exciting or disruptive developments might be. But first, I do just want to remind people that if they want to get in contact with the podcast to let us know topics you'd like us to discuss or to give us any other feedback, then you can reach us by emailing ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And also a gentle reminder to please take a moment and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and leave us a rating and a review. So, as I said, in a minute, really want to come on to your predictions for the future. But first, let's think about some of the challenges and also how they might be overcome. So, Marie, we've mentioned the EU EIDAS regulations a few times now. It obviously has this very ambitious goal, as you said, but we're now entering that phase of the work phase of having to implement it. What do you think are going to be some of the main challenges there?
So the EU regulation on identity and trust services, EIDAS, is hugely ambitious and visionary, I think, and clearly that is a challenge. I think there's multiple challenges in terms of how it's going to span out. Of course, you have technology, you have regulation, legal equivalence, you have adoption among the consumers, you have adoption among merchants, the businesses on the other side. I think that the hardest really is going to be at the end of the day to create such an ecosystem that where the consumers are encouraged to adapt and to adopt the wallet, make use of it, and where you're going to find the businesses and as well as the public sector to also to make use of it and give the benefits to everybody. It's not just the necessary standards for interoperability. It's not just the regulation. It's not just the interesting use cases, but it's really everything coming together. And so, coming from a company, doing our little bit to contribute to the payment ecosystem, it's hard work. It requires people moving in step and having a common understanding of where we are ending up as well, and an agreement around the technology and the regulation. So I think that is the one that makes me most worried. I do see, though, that the efforts that the Commission have started with and now increasingly putting in as well on getting collaboration between private sector and public sector, especially with the Commission, but also the activities happening in the different countries, that is helping. But it's basically, this is a change project, a transformational change across not just one country, but across the EU.
It's so interesting in your answer that, of course, adoption is always one of the hardest parts. There are always technical challenges as well, but actually adoption is really difficult. And it reminds me a bit of the classic payments chicken and egg as well, that, of course, no one wants to use an identity if no one accepts it, but no one is so interested in accepting it if no one is using it. And so I think, I guess, as you say, there has to be clear reasons and benefits on both sides for why people would want to use it. Sometimes it's easy to forget as well that people have to be able to understand it. So, of course, on a theoretical level, all this fine-grained control and the extra privacy is good. But if people don't really understand that or know that that's a benefit or see why they should use that rather than just presenting their driving license, then, of course, it doesn't necessarily translate into people actually adopting it practically. I mean, I'm interested, Marie, then, whether you have some thoughts on how that challenge around adoption and acceptance by consumers and merchants, how that might be addressed.
Yeah, I think there's some multiple. There's a silver bullet. There's a lot of hard work. But I think one important part is to explain to the citizens, to the consumers, what the European Identity Wallet is, how it's protecting their privacy, the people in charge, basically, and the benefits that it's going to have for them interacting with digital services. And I think also a bit of a basic explanation of this is how you use it, this is where you can use it. So I think the whole communications is really important. We already see concerns in certain groups around the privacy. Those really needs to be addressed, of course, and taken seriously. They are real. People are worried. But at the end of the day, this wallet is supposed to have clear advantages in terms of protecting the privacy. I see a lot of work still needed on standards, common interfaces, common data formats. It's a new technology that is being deployed. So there's work there, I think, to be done. And then I see glimmers of hope in terms of the collaboration between private sector and public sector as well. That really has to be much more prevalent. And governments in each country, they need to step up and take ownership and take responsibility that they are given through this regulation, and work very closely with private sector to find a solution that works for everybody, so that private sector businesses can adopt and can get the benefits, make use of the wallets, which again is going to help the consumers to take the choice that they have of onboarding and getting a wallet issued to them as well. So I think that's a few of the activities that must be done in order to create this ecosystem so that everybody can benefit.
That's really interesting. So it's on one level, the communication to help consumers understand it, and particularly around the privacy and the trust aspects. Then there is, I suppose, the infrastructure, the interoperability, and making sure that it's possible at the technical level. And then I think you were hinting at us as well that when we talk about public-private partnerships and the whole ecosystem developing, there also has to be clear benefits, I suppose, for every party in the ecosystem to make it work. And again, I mean, I keep seeing parallels to payments, but of course it's another case that any successful payment means there has to be something in it for all of the parties involved. Otherwise it never flies. And maybe, Colombe, I can ask a similar question to you, but focus a little bit more on the technology side. Are there particular technology challenges or technologies that you see are going to help with the rollout of digital identity like this?
I have identified 5 core technologies that can come with this eIDAS and all the digital identity domain. The first one would be mobile and biometrics. So you have in your pocket your mobile phone, you use it every day. It's a secure environment to store these credentials. So it's really a core thing that we have to rely on for these developments. The second one would be the standards. Marie was speaking of earlier. So we have the European Digital Wallet standardization through the Architecture Reference Framework, and it's relying on W3C verifiable credentials, which are not specific to Europe. There are standards which are worldwide standard at the moment that we are willing to build the digital identity on top of. And then you have the security and privacy we were speaking of earlier, which is mostly based on cryptography technology. And behind that, I don't want to go too deep into this technological stuff, but we are speaking of zero knowledge proof, meaning that if you're willing to share for example, the fact that you are an adult, you are not obliged to share your specific birth date, which is personal information. You have also selective disclosure, meaning that if you're asked to share information about your personal identity, then you could choose to only share your first name or your address or something like that. And the unlinkability that we were speaking of earlier, the fact that if you are going to twice in the same service, you could decide that you are not willing to be recognized, even if you are willing to share information which are stored on your wallet. The first one would be decentralized architecture. This is the idea that, you have your identity. This identity is issued by a government or a company, stored in your wallet. Then you can share this information to different companies, governments, organization. And, those consumers will share that information, but in a mutual authentication. It means that both the user is authenticated, but also the merchant or the company that is willing to access this data. And you know who you are sharing the information with. And also the trusted issuer, for example, the government, should not know who you are sharing this information to. And it's really part of what has been decided and put in the law in Europe. So it's really the idea to build trust here, which is very important. And the last one would be artificial intelligence. So, probably that biometrics is based on artificial intelligence. So here, those are tools that we surely can use to authenticate the users when they are willing to share the identity. At the moment, we are relying on finger or face or voice biometrics, but in the future, we will build more advanced biometrics based on several information, not only, as I said, your finger or your voice or whatever, but also the place where you are, the services that you use, how you use your mobile phone, all of that in a continuous manner, not only at one point of the day, will be your biometrics and will make sure that you are the right person using the wallet. Artificial intelligence will be also used for fraud detection, but it can be, on the other side, it can be also a threat. As you know, we've all heard of deepfakes.
So, Colombe, it's very interesting to hear you talk about all 5 of those. And I think also a small kind of additional bit of information you added there about the fact that when you share details about yourself, you also want to know or have confidence in who you're sharing that information with. And as you say, also the people that have verified those credentials, could be the government, could be your bank, shouldn't know who you're sharing that with. And so that has some specific implications for how the system is architected. I'm just thinking that, only a few days ago, I had to take a photo of a passport in a banking app to kind of make a proof of who I was. And I'm fairly cautious on these matters, but it's becoming increasingly difficult, I think, for people to know the difference between a fraudster asking them to take a photo of their passport and send it to them so their identity can be stolen, and their bank asking them. And that's where, of course, doing that in a way that is by design secure, to make sure that you can only share it with a party that you know who they are, is really important.
Not only the picture of your passport, but also your payment means that you are sharing with a company, online company, for example, and you're not sure who they are. So it's something that probably digital identity can help with.
Yeah, exactly. Just adding, at least for payments, we can tokenize that card details that you gave, that you're putting into the merchant, right? So that they can't be used for anything else. But who knows what's happening to that picture of your passport that you took and uploaded to what you thought was the banking website.
Your biometric pictures, when you're lost, they're lost.
They're lost, and they can be faked.
For sure.
So
yeah, and I think it's also a reminder that, of course, people will have concerns about privacy and security for digital identity, but it's a reminder that we don't live in a perfect world at the moment when we're talking about physical identity and how that's used. And actually, I think in some cases, clearly, this digital identity offers methods of proving information about yourself that are actually going to be safer and more private than the existing mechanisms. So I think what I'd like to finish off with is just to ask you both about what predictions you have for the future. So Colombe, maybe I start by asking you what you think might be one of the more surprising developments that we may see around digital identity in the next few years.
I think we were speaking of it just a few seconds ago. For me, I started to work on that topic like 2 or 3 years ago, and I was very surprised. And when I understood what could be the impact on payment world, we've seen that in different countries, the digital identity went very fast to be used by citizens, like in India or in Sweden. And it's not only their identity that they're using, but also their payment credential. So they are able to do payment, initiate transactions. And for me, at least in my opinion, a clear view that payment and digital identity will merge. We see clear use cases such as age verification, which is something that the merchants are asking. And at the moment, there are solutions, but it's not that easy to make it work technically. And the price, it's not that easy. And we were speaking of earlier, just to get information during the same process as payment, it has a huge business value, I think.
It's interesting because you're right that often the point where you need to prove something about yourself is very close to or the same as the point when you need to pay. And I'm thinking the obvious case is buying alcohol, for example, where it's not illegal for someone underage to come into the shop and look at it. Do you see what I mean? The point at which you have to be absolutely sure that the person is over 18 is the point where you sell it to them. So the payment transaction and the verification are very in terms of the user journey, they're very close together.
And I think we do not need to wait until all the eIDAS wallets will be on the market, because there are coming solutions like in different countries, like we were speaking of Sweden or other. In Germany, you can have the edge of the person with the card. And I think also of Click to Pay, the solution that is coming on the market and can provide information. So no need for the customers to create an account when they are willing to pay and provide with information like their billing address and so on. They can use their payment means to share this information at the same time. So I think it's going to be huge in the coming years.
I completely agree with Colombe that payment will see a transformation. You have more choice of how to pay. It becomes easier to what is the source of funds? Is it cards or is it going to be an account? Because you're in charge in a better way. And very convenient, of course, to combine that payment with information about yourself and preferences that you have. So, of course, that's what we are doing with Worldline as well, working at Visa with different types of payment types, whether it's cards or whether it's account, as well as different ways of adding additional information to the payment transaction. But I think the consequences will go much beyond payment and really affect society as a whole. You have this fundamental capability of securely and conveniently knowing who you're dealing with, what they want. You have the information about them that's verified, you can trust. You have lots of data around it as well. You have a way of very easily confirming a payment as well, very smooth, very seamless. You can talk about embedded finance as well. Getting much more personalized and intelligent with AI. And I think that is really going to change the way that consumers are interacting with any kind of merchant, any kind of digital service. To the extent that in the future, you will kind of look back and go, what was this thing about username and password? What do you mean I have to take a picture of my passport to confirm who I am, right? Now I'm scanning a QR code, I'm using my face or my fingerprint to confirm and to share what I want to share. And that's transformational. And Colombe, you mentioned India with Aadhaar. That's one of my increasingly favorite examples, to see the combination of identity, a bank account, and a mobile device to interact with, and you overlay commerce on that, marketplaces, AI to interpret what people want to have and what they're looking for, and you really have revolution in terms of payment and past payment and commerce that I think is exciting. So we can look towards emerging markets like India to learn what might happen in Europe as well. So yeah, I think it'll have transformational impact on the whole society, much beyond payment are important, but much beyond payment.
So I think it was really fascinating to hear both of your views on this topic of digital identity. And I think clearly in the EU, we've had this event, if you like, on the 29th, and that is paving the way for quite a huge change inside the EU. I think it was interesting, Marie, that you raised some of the challenges, and particularly around, from the consumer side, the adoption and how they can trust it, believe in it, consider it secure. Colombe, interesting to hear some of the technologies that are going to help implement digital identity. And then I think, looking forward to the future, really seeing how once you have kind of universal trusted digital identity and you have universal digital payments and you have, as you say, AI layered on top of that, it really opens up all sorts of new possibilities. So really, really a fascinating discussion to have with you both. So I do want to thank you ever so much for sharing all of these insights on the podcast. Marie, thank you very much for joining us.
Very nice to be in here, David, and great discussions, and nice to meet you as well, Colombe.
And of course, yes, Colombe, thank you so much for joining us as well.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to have this discussion today.
Super. And that just leaves me finally, of course, to thank our dear listeners for joining us once again as we navigated digital payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.